Final Fantasy VII may now be over 20 years old, but its legacy endures to this day, with multiple other games and projects since released into its mythos, and a full-fledged remake in the works. It's still a good time as any to talk about the JRPG classic. A massive thank you to all of those who continue to support my work through Patreon or YouTube membership, and if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to be notified of future FF7 content. Without any further ado, let's get straight into things today. Here are 5 facts about Final Fantasy VII that you may not have known. Spoilers ahead. Okay, so FF7 may be taken for granted as the game that brought the franchise into the 3D era thanks to the capabilities of the PlayStation hardware, but this was not how the title was originally envisioned. Shortly after Final Fantasy VI was released on the Super Nintendo in 1994, Square set their developers to begin work on number 7. The game was also initially developed for the SNES, and the team even got to the point of achieving a working prototype, which to my knowledge has never been shown publicly. In fact, the finished game changed a lot from the original ideas. Not only would it have encompassed the tried and tested 2D art style, but the settings and characters were also substantially different from how we now know them today. However, these massive changes in eventually redeveloping the game for the, at the time, upcoming PS1 were less to do with dissatisfaction with the current project and more to do with the company's other circumstances. As development for the initial version of Final Fantasy VII was underway, Square were also struggling to meet deadlines for another fan favourite game that was also under development called Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger was supposed to be released in 1994, but had to be pushed back to the following year. And to help things along, Square put virtually all development of FF7 on hold, so that the developers could then support the team in charge of Chrono Trigger. And by 1995, when work finally resumed on Final Fantasy VII, gamers by then were already focused on and excited for the upcoming console generation, with the PlayStation releasing later that same year. And after internal discussions, Square finally decided to take a substantial risk and scrap much of the current work that had been undertaken for the game in order to shift development onto the PlayStation.
An evil empire is sucking the life force from the planet, destroying all that's in its path. It's up to one soldier of fortune to save the world. If he succeeds, you survive. If he fails, you can always hit the reset button. Final Fantasy VII. PlayStation.
And the development team was boosted to close to 150 people, and the final version of Final Fantasy VII, that is the version we now know and love today, was completed virtually from start to finish in less than a single year. But what do you folks think of the fact that FF7 was almost a SNES game? To be honest, Final Fantasy VI is wonderful, and I'm sure Final Fantasy VII would have been also. However, I do doubt it would have been innovative and thus had the same lasting effects on gaming culture that ended up being the case. Fans may recognise Adia Kramer as one of the main antagonists from Final Fantasy VIII, but what you may not know is that the character of Adia had originally been designed during 7's development, but was then scrapped at some point, likely during the SNES version of the game, in favour of its current repertoire of villains. Although detailed information is, somewhat sparse, it does seem that Adia was to be a witch that would likely show up and wreak havoc. However, this was all during the game's original development, and so eventually the character was removed from the game and later incorporated as a major role within Final Fantasy VIII. But at the very least, it demonstrates for us again just how radically different Final Fantasy VII might have been in a parallel universe. The death of Aries, or Aries as I have known her, is arguably the most memorable plot point of Final Fantasy VII, and if you can think of video game character deaths without FF7 coming to mind, well, you're probably not watching this video. What you may not know is that this particular emotional scene was possibly inspired by real-life events involving Hironobu Sakaguchi. Now, I want to tread carefully here because there does seem to be a lot of contradictory information around the internet regarding this situation. For example, according to some big-named gaming sites, in fact, Sakaguchi's mother died during development of this game, and that's what inspired him to bring in this story of Aries' death. However, in an old interview with Sakaguchi himself, he states that the passing of his mother occurred several years before, in fact, during development of Final Fantasy III. However, he does then go on to say that his work on 7's presentation of this theme helped him with overcoming his grief, and so yes, it is still possible his mother's death had some inspiration towards Aries' fate, but perhaps not as much as the internet would imply. After the previously mentioned Aries' death scene at the end of the game's first disc, it's actually possible to witness her ghost. Indeed, later during your adventure, you can revisit the slums in Midgar, and for a moment you are able to notice that Aries is in fact haunting the church she previously spent her time in. As you enter the building, you may see that she is in one of two locations, either standing with the children for a brief instance before vanishing, or tending to her flowers before disappearing as you approach. But if you're a dedicated FF7 fan, you probably knew about this already, right? Well, what you may not know is that this may be more of a ghost within the game's programming code rather than a situation intentionally designed by the developers. However, if her post-death appearance in the church is a bug, it's perhaps even more spooky. I mean, think about it, the death of Aries is arguably the most impactful event of, well, I would say the entire Final Fantasy franchise. And she just happens to be the one character for whom this bug occurs. There are two reasons that would suggest that her appearance here is indeed a bug. First, the other characters during this church visit are also somewhat glitchy, and you can see this yourself at normal game speed with your own eyes, though it's perhaps easy to demonstrate if we skip through the frames. For example, you can clearly see as Cloud enters the church how the young girl instantly switches position as the screen is loading. And also, if Aries' ghost appears in the position that I don't have footage of, where she's standing with the children, then she too will instantly teleport over to her flowers before vanishing, and all within a few frames. Secondly, and I do think this is the clencher now, this appearance of Aries also occurs if you return to the church before she is actually killed. And there are at least 2 times during Disc 1, before the party leaves Midgar, that you are actually able to return to the church while Aries is still alive and well, and yet you are able to see her alleged ghost. It's perhaps no secret that the Emerald and Ruby weapons, 2 super bosses added into the Western release of Final Fantasy VII, were the game's hardest enemy encounters. However, which enemy would you say was the weakest? Well, congratulations if you said Sephiroth. Yes, the final encounter in the game is where Cloud faces off against the main antagonist by himself and unleashes the power of the Omni/Limit Break. Those fireworks were perhaps a little bit of overkill, however, as Sephiroth has a meagre 1 HP. Yes, this makes him weaker than any other enemy in the game, even those encountered right at the very beginning. Okay, fair enough, this fight against Seph is more of a story encounter than anything else, but still those numbers speak for themselves and are undisputed. Sephiroth may be a great Final Fantasy villain, but sorry dude, it seems like your final incarnation still needed to level up a little bit more before fulfilling your aspirations of taking over the planet. Well, that's my 5 fun facts, thanks for checking out the video. If you can be bothered, please remember to subscribe to my channel, and we'll catch up next time. Have a great day.